Karnataka, in their wisdom, merged the Yelahanka town with Bangalore. It became part of Bangalore city, and now it has lost its identity. Yelahanka is, yearning to get many things from Bangalore, kind of seeking support all the time from Bangalore. It has lost its own identity, and similarly, there are other satellite towns of Bangalore. So this is the second model, and of course, connectivity is there. There is good road connectivity and so on, but identity is not there. City's identity has kind of vanished in the overall overwhelming identity of Bangalore. And then we have got, rest of the country. There are these examples are elsewhere also. The rest of the country, the most of the city satellite towns, they are not taken care of. They are not connected well. So people struggle to go from the peri-urban area to urban area, main city. So friend, the example, this result, the conclusion is that peri-urban areas can become a big support for the main city. Gurgaon has taken a lot of burden off Delhi, in terms of crowding. The population growth rate of Delhi has decelerated in the last decade of 2001 to 11. It became just about 25%. Otherwise, it used to grow at the rate of 50% in every decade since independence. So satellite towns, peri-urban spaces, if they are given adequate attention and proper governance framework, their identity, their culture, their ethos will be maintained, can be maintained, and they can give a big support to the main city and quality of life of the people in both the main city and the peri-urban city, the town, can be improved for mutual benefit also. So this is the general perception I am proposing for your consideration, and case by case, different aspects of this broad theme will be presented by the learned speakers. And it is my privilege to have to be participating in this session as chair with an excellent set of luminaries who will be making their presentation. And I would be also looking forward to these presentations, commencing with Dr. Tathagat Chatterjee, who has already been introduced by Dr. Leon. And with that, I hand over to Dr. Tathagat to make his presentation. Over to you, sir.
Shall I begin?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. So it's a pleasure to join when in a panel where we have great persons like Dr. Sudhir Krishna as a chairperson. I'd like to thank Professor Sridharan and sir also for having me here. In my talk, I'll be talking about peri-urbanization in the context of Bhubaneswar. Now, in the issue of peri-urbanization in Indian context has mostly been talked about regarding metro cities like, as Dr. Sudhir Krishna has just mentioned about Delhi, NCR region, Gurgaon, or Bangalore. But I'll be talking in the context of peri-urbanization of a medium-sized town that is Bhubaneswar and the kind of challenge that it is facing. So I'll just start sharing my screen. Is it visible?
Yes, we can see your screen, Dr. Chatterjee.
So I'll be talking about an issue which does not get that much attention when we discuss about peri-urbanization. It's about small water bodies in the peri-urban areas. I know, I mean, this is an issue of very great significance in the eastern fringes of Calcutta. Professor Banerjee is there. I think he would be also maybe talking on this point, but not so much in other areas. But this is a very critical challenge that we are facing. When we talk about peri-urban areas, we know that peri-urban is an extremely complex area zone. It has simultaneously depicts rural as well as urban characters. And I mean, the spaces in the peri-urban areas are very dynamic in nature. And the only thing constant in the peri-urban area is that it is in a constant state of flux. I mean, then there is a very frequent changes of land use patterns, and the nature of economic activities takes place in the peri-urban areas. And all these changes has their economic, ecological, as well as social impacts. In economic terms, I mean, there are new opportunities created due to urbanization. There is an opportunity for people to gradually move out of agriculture. But at the same time, there are many case studies on peri-urban areas that due to forced land acquisition, there are a lot of displacements and conflicts happening in peri-urban areas. But the critical point is peri-urbanization leads to livelihood transitions of the people, which has not received that much attention. That, I mean, there is a very close connection between land use change and there is a livelihood transitions. So this is a point that needs to be, I think, at the center of a future discourse about peri-urbanization. The issue of ecological impacts had been very widely talked about. There are untreated waste disposal, degradation of lands and water bodies, haphazard conversions of the farm areas, loss of green cover, biodiversity, increasing pollution. So this has been very widely talked about in literature. There are new vulnerabilities happening. There are social conflicts happening due to the cultural mix that peri-urban areas witness, and Gurgaon is again a very prime example where there are a lot of people who are the old residents of that area, who's the old farmers in that area, but I mean, they have now sold their farmlands and the new people have moved in, but there is always a kind of a cultural conflict that goes on between the new urban middle class that have moved, who are linked to the IT industry, IT and the BPO industry of Gurgaon, and the old farming community who has now gone into transportation and other kind of businesses, small construction activities, etc. So all these issues translate into governance challenges, which are also well known in literature, that there are institutional overlaps, lacks of clarity about administrative jurisdictions. There are statutory development plans, regulatory plans, but which are not adequately monitored, unplanned dispersal of industries and other economic activities from the core city regions. There are inadequacies in the property registration systems. Land records are not properly updated. There are land disputes, land grabs happening often by the real estate lobby. There is lack of data also. There is a very huge lack of data about the population changes. The migration is a fact of life in the peri-urban areas. And of course, I mean, all this leads to delivery in the civic infrastructures. So core areas in the cities tend to get prioritized over the peri-urban areas. And of course, I mean, there is a lack of local level administrative capacity. So there has been a lot of literature already in different countries. It is not only unique in India, but there have been a lot of studies of peri-urbanization, particularly in African context. So also Southeast Asian countries, like, I mean, Leaf's very important study about Vietnam. So these are kind of common problems in most developing countries. Now coming to specifically to the issue of Bhubaneswar, which is not that big a city in Indian terms, and it is not even a million population city. In Indian context, it is really a medium sized city. But what we see here in Bhubaneswar, that there has been a huge number of planning activities. There is so many large numbers of plans. But I mean, there are many plans by different agencies, by the development authority, by the municipal corporation. Also, some of the plans are being anchored. There is a plan being anchored by the smart cities. Bhubaneswar is one of the smart cities. There is a plan by the Orissa Pollution Control Board. There are state disaster management authority. They are also preparing plans. Also, so what we have is a proliferation of plans. But what I call that, I mean, there is a lot of plans, but very little planning. In the sense that planning is a continuous activity, that planning is not a one-time fixed function. Planning to be really viable needs to be a continuous process. That is what is lacking, that we have a lot of plans, different areas focusing on different action areas, but not having much of a continuity in updations. Now, when the specific area that I'll be talking about, this area is called the Sundarpada Jatani area road. Dr. Sudhir Krishna would be familiar with this area. This area is very close to the Bhubaneswar airport. And I mean, in this drawing map, you can see, I mean, this gray area, this is actually the Bhubaneswar airport. And in the master plan of the city, it is the southwest side of the city that is seen as a growth corridor. Because very rightly, I mean, there is a national highway which connects Bhubaneswar to Calcutta and Chennai, which is on that direction. So the city's main growth direction is towards that. That is as per the plan document. But what is happening for the last 5, 6, 8 years, the growth is also happening towards the southeast corridor, and this area, it's part of the, you can see on the map, which is on the corner, that it is really at the fringe, that it is part of it is in the Bhubaneswar Municipal Corporation area, part of it is covered on the Bhubaneswar Development Authority area, but most of it is regarded as rural. But this is where a lot of development is happening because of its proximity to Bhubaneswar airport. The land is cheaper here. And of course, in this area, several well-known educational institutions has come up. So which is triggering a growth in this area. Our university is located also on this road. Xavier University, IIT Bhubaneswar is also not far away. There is Odisha Engineering College and several other private educational institutions have been given land in this area. But this is not getting reflected in the city's master plan. So what do we see here? That, I mean, this new growth that is happening, it is not a haphazard growth in the planning sense of the term, because the type of growth that is happening are mostly apartment building for the new middle class who are either working with the airport or the civil aviation related work, or they're staying close to the city. The area is not that far from the main city also, or they're associated with one of these many educational institutions that has come. So the houses, etc., are of good quality, but the land use conversion process through which that is happening, that leaves a lot of things to be desired. The main casualty in this area, what we see is that a lot of house construction is happening, but there is no drainage plan. And I mean, this area, this being a delta region, there are a lot of, I mean, the small river tributaries and the irrigation canals and small ponds, which are becoming the victim of this kind of construction activities. Because there is real estate growth is happening at a very good speed in this area. but I mean, none of these houses has got drainage plants, and also construction wastes are being dumped into the smaller ponds. The point here is that as this area is undergoing change, the ponds, which had been part and parcel of this area's people's lifestyle and livelihood, these ponds are losing significance because many people were earlier dependent on these ponds for, I mean, as for fisheries and purpose, and many of these ponds were used as water bodies for the cattle and for people for washing clothes and things like that. That is changing, and these ponds are no longer having their use, and so people are dumping their wastes into these ponds, and these ponds are getting stagnated. In the process, what is happening, this area's drainage system it's getting clogged, and at the slightest monsoon, the area, all these fancy new buildings, they're up to a certain level, at the parking level, gets submerged. Only some
Dr. Chatterjee, although this is a very interesting presentation, but could you come to a close in view of time? Thank you.
Yeah. So only the ponds which are part of a temple complex are relatively better managed. There had been some interventions by the government to improve the conditions of some of the ponds by utilizing the ponds which are in the rural areas by using MGNREGS funding, and the government has also started Fish Pond Yojana, a program to promote sweetwater aquaculture in this area. Also, the ponds which are within the Bhubaneswar Municipal Corporation area, the municipal corporation has started a pilot project of leasing out the ponds, but in many cases, including in this area, it is facing problems due to the local community are not in favor of the pond being leased out to outsiders. So my main takeaway points here is that I'll be short, that there is an issue of documentation, that small water bodies are not properly documented in the land documents, in the panchayat or the municipal corporation records. Irrigation, the ponds and the canals which are part of the irrigation system, those are being maintained by the irrigation department. But we need to have an integrated management system for the water bodies. The GIS mapping, combining the rural and urban areas, it's necessary. Also, we need a regulatory system for to stop haphazard conversion of the pond water bodies. This kind of a regulation is there in West Bengal. With, again, I mean, there are a lot of problems with that also, but I mean, some regulation is better than having no regulation. We need to have greater involvement of the community actors in the neighborhood level for protection of water bodies. In Bhubaneswar also, there had been a couple of cases where the communities have come together.
Dr. Chatterjee, very much request you to kindly conclude.
Yeah, I'm finished. This is my last point. So need for communities to protect, and there is a need to take the livelihood issues into consideration when in the master plan process. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Tathagat, for bringing out the very critical points for peri-urban spaces, which happen to be valid for all habitats. But peri-urban spaces, if we tackle them, it will mean a lot to all of us, the whole country and whole society. So friends, with that, we move on. And now the next speaker is Professor Mr. Mayur Kulkarni, who is a planner with the MMRDA, Mumbai. He is an architect and town planner having 14 years of experience in master planning of townships and the special economic zones. He prepared the city development plan of Trimbak Municipal Council in Nashik district, and which is famous for a spiritual gathering called Kumbh Mela. Since 2010, he is working in the MMRDA he was involved in planning and development control of the Special Planning Authority areas of MMRDA. He is currently entrusted with the preparation of plans for the urbanizable zones in the region and regional plan for the extended areas of the Mumbai metropolitan region. He also works on the financial assistance provided by MMRDA to the local governments. So we look forward to Mr. Mayur Kulkarni. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm very glad for the opportunity. Shall I share my screen now?
Yes, please. And my request to you, sir, a 12-minute time limit, kindly take care.
Yes, yes. Is it visible now?
Yes, it is visible. Go ahead.
Yes.
Since I'm working in MMRD, I would like to start with the governance and planning process here in Mumbai and MMR, and especially in India. A brief introduction about the governance and planning I would like to share. Basically, some of my Indian fellow speakers might be knowing. So, pre-independence, there was unspecified role of local self-governments for the peri-urban areas. But in 1992, there was 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Act occurred. And the local self-governments, either in urban or in rural areas, got the opportunity to generate their revenues and spend on their infrastructure. So basically, the role was very specified, and subsequently, the Constitution Amendment Act also had the provision for preparation of Metropolitan Planning Committees Act by the respective states. So in Maharashtra, the government of Maharashtra had prepared a Metropolitan Planning Committees Act in 1999, and accordingly, I will come, the MMRDA's role and the third regional plan will come in subsequent slides. And regarding planning, in Maharashtra, the Bombay Town Planning Act was there for the preparation of town planning scheme, especially in the city of Mumbai pre-independence era. But after independence in 1954, the revolution, industrial revolution, and there was a lot of requirement to prepare a comprehensive plan for the city as well. So for Mumbai, Thane, and Nagpur, those were the major cities at that time. So 1954 Act came. However, it is realized that it is not serving the purpose of the only cities are development plan for the cities will be inadequate to cater for the areas in located in fringe areas around the metropolitan cities. So the Maharashtra Regional and Town Planning Act came in force in from 1966, which had a provision for preparation of regional plan, so which will take care of the fringe areas and other areas in the districts or special metropolitan regions or specified regions like Mahabaleshwar tourism region. My organization was formed in 1974, but the first regional plan was prepared before formation of MMRDA in 1973. The second plan was prepared by MMRDA in 1999, and the third regional plan was also prepared by MMRDA under the guidance of Metropolitan Planning Committee, which is formed by the constitutional members and the bureaucrats. So there is a lot of stakeholder involvement in the Metropolitan Planning Committee, which prepares plan for the region with the metro cities, mega cities, which having population of more than 10 lakhs like Mumbai, Thane, Navi Mumbai, and surrounding areas. So Mr. Chatterjee has already explained the conditions of peri-urban areas. However, I would like to briefly go through the same. The reasons behind undeveloped conditions are they are self-developed basically. They are not sponsored by the state government or the mega cities, the parent cities around which they are getting developed. They are basically unorganized sector industries or people who are working in unorganized sector are basically staying there because of the lower rate of the land, you can say, and the population is mixed, as we can see. The local the rural plus urban, and which is a combination of a cosmopolitan population due to heavy migration. The difficulty in providing infrastructure is basically if there are no metropolitan region authorities, they are vulnerable for the lack of revenues, because Gram Panchayats, though they have authority to generate revenue for their own infrastructure, but they are quite inadequate. And apart from that, they have limited manpower and other resources, natural resources to deploy for the same. So there is a lot of dependency on the mother cities, and ecologically it is also not sustainable to leave them on their part to take care of their infrastructure and serve the citizens. So there are, and apart from physical infrastructure, there is also limited scope for recreational open spaces, schools, healthcare, etc. Because there is no planning for the rural areas as such around the cities. So challenges, what we can see is the responsibility of providing infrastructure. Who will provide the infrastructure? Then who will manage the infrastructure? Because even if the government provides them, who will manage it? Because there should be some manpower permanently deployed on this. And whether we will require the restructuring of local self-government model, which is formed in 1992, until date it is serving very well. So whether we shall require a metropolitan council kind of thing, which is practiced outside India, in Japan or in US. So and the expenses, they are perpetual, because the social infrastructure or the physical infrastructure will require perpetual expenses to take care of. I would like to present the condition of setup in MMR, especially Mumbai metropolitan region. Initially in 1970, there was a lot of scope for preparation of regional plan, because a lot of urban area was quite low. If you can see in the lower image, there was 77% of the region was under the regional plan realm. Subsequently in 96 it was reduced to 56%, and subsequently it is now 38%. So the issue is, the Mumbai metropolitan region has a very different context of urban and rural. It is more of urban, and the remaining area is quite less developed, or in the remaining 38%, almost 40 to 45% is under forest and under buffer zone of the forest, and remaining is under cultivation. And the green zone 2, we specially had a provision of green zone 2, which is the water catchment area. So we have purposefully have a stringent regulations in the green zone 2. The majority of the area is non-rural, and if you can see the larger image, most of the area is covered either under the urban local bodies or in the under the special planning authority areas, like Navi Mumbai International Airport notified area, Kopta New Town, MSR and MMRDA's SP area like AK, Ambernath, Kurgaon, Badlapur surrounding notified area, and Kalan surrounding notified area. So more of the area is brought under the planning realm. So not let them vulnerable. So we have tried to bring more and more area under the preparation of development plan. So MMRDA, what is MMRDA is basically interested to prepare the regional plan. So we have made provisions for after a lot of stakeholder consultation, we have prepared the regional plan, and along with the regional connectivity roads and infrastructure in peri-urban areas, we have also funded a lot of outer area road development schemes, integrated village development schemes, which are for the infrastructure of village areas in the region. Also, there was Swachh, what we can say. There was Nirmal Abhiyan sponsored by MMRD, where almost 25,000 seats of toilets were developed at 1,300 locations. And we also provide financial assistance to the local self-governments, because they are having inadequate fund many a times to provide water supply schemes, concretization of roads and sewerage projects, or for that matter, other infrastructure. So not only physical planning, but we also do consultation, we also do funding. So in a way, we are trying to not only have focus on urban areas, but we do work on the development of rural areas around the same. Recommendations from the regional plan was to have municipal expansion and bring more and more villages into the existing municipal corporations council, like Vasai Virar Council, Kalyan Dombivli Corporation, Bhiwandi Nizampur Corporation. So by bringing more villages in the urban areas, they will have a proper authority to take care of them, to collect the revenue, as well as provide the corporations will be responsible for providing infrastructure. Also to form new councils or merge some of the smaller councils into a bigger corporation. Path ahead, I would suggest is newer SP areas we are proposing, because there are very few out of the 38%, as I said, in the region, 38% remaining region. We are planning to have some the urbanizable zones are there, for which we are hoping and we are pitching for the government to prepare to make us the special planning authority, so that we can prepare development plans for those urbanizable zones, so that there will be only green zone and a forest zone in the region. Otherwise, every thing will be under the development plans, and MMRD can take care of the infrastructure. So there are, apart from that, there are roads like Mumbai, like multimodal corridor, like Trans
Sir, you
Harbour
have
Link, which is
two more
currently
minutes,
being-
sir.
Yeah,
Sorry, sir, you have 2 more minutes, Kulkarni Sahab. You
I'm
have 2 more
summing
minutes.
up. These are the
Please.
basically provisions to connect Mumbai island city to the main landwards side. New rail links are proposed. There are also proposal to connect Mumbai's metro to the Navi Mumbai metro, and have a connectivity from existing airport to the Navi Mumbai International newly proposed airport. And apart from that, there is connectivity, proposed connectivity of by the water transport to the Alibag region, and the southern region, which is relatively undeveloped, will be also connected by road and water transport. So extension of region is also proposed, whereby the Palghar and some of the areas in Raigad district are also brought under the metropolitan region. To have a sustainable transformation, I would like to suggest to have sorry, I am just having a feeling a bit we have eco-sensitive zone proposed around the Matheran ecologically sensitive area, and the government of India is regulating that, and also by introducing public transport system by new metro links, we are connecting the suburbs and extended suburbs of to the mainland, which will reduce pollution, as well as MMR has been always public transport driven city. So this will bring more and more people and in the suburbs to connect by public transport. And sustainable initiative, what we have done is we have entire MMR under the GIS based maps, and we are preparing plans for the local self-government also. We have provided Surya water supply scheme, a dam for the villages around MMR, the extended MMR. And village improvement schemes are also we are taking care of. So having a sustainable initiative and social infrastructure. Metropolitan planning, what we do, what we are thinking of, and creating new cities, councils, expansion for the peri-urban areas, the cluster development or group gram panchayat model, and local development centers as proposed in the regional plan, whereby a cluster of villages will be served by a central village, which will be active. There will be amenities and employment generation things for the surrounding villages. Risk-based classification, like architects themselves can issue building permissions so that there will be lesser governance, more of governance and less of
I am so sorry. I think we really have to ask you and urge you to stop now, Mayor Kulkarni, despite being a very interesting presentation, but we want to remain on schedule also for other speakers and discussion.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thanks for the
So
opportunity.
thank you. I think we appreciate, we are really appreciative of the excellent presentation by Mayur Kulkarni ji. And now we move on, and we have another presentation. Next presentation is by Ms. Monica Bahal, Senior Advisor, Sustainable Urban Development, Smart Cities, GIZ. And the title of her presentation is Strengthening Governance for Sustainable Infrastructure, a brief on GIZ experience as part of the Sustainable Urban Development Smart Cities project. So over to you, Monica ji, and I request all these speakers to kindly ensure that they maintain the time limit, because all presentations are excellent. You know, we must enjoy and relish, have time to relish all the presentations. Over to you, madam.
Yes, thank you, sir. Is my screen visible?
Yes, visible.
Yes. So thanks, Dr. Sudeep Krishnan and Professor Sridharan and all other organizing members of the seminar. I should congratulate for a good line speakers, and also I would like to stick to the time allocated to me. As GIZ, I think most of the people know about GIZ. I would like to focus on areas which talks about strengthening governance, and also try to share some of the GIZ experiences. GIZ, as most of you know, provides tailor-made solutions for cost-effective services of sustainable development. And GIZ is working on several projects, and one of the projects is on sustainable urban development for smart cities. And when we started the project, it was very important to look at how can a sustainable development happen, including the urban and peri-urban areas. We focused on thematic areas of housing, basic services, SDGs, and we realized very soon that we have to work at all the levels of governance in order to ensure that sustainable development takes place. So at national level, state level, and city level. I think my co-speakers have already talked a lot about the thrust that is prevailing in the peri-urban areas due to the urban areas. And we can see every area has its own chronology. So as Dr. Sudhir Krishnan was also mentioning about Gurgaon, so a village slowly turns into an urban areas, and then it gets really the pressure of development. So how can we safeguard that the pressure of development is not pushed to the peri-urban areas? So while we are looked at the pressures that urban areas and peri-urban areas, I think Dr. Tathagat also mentioned about the status of wetlands and forest and water bodies. And we feel that due to the development of urban areas, the peri-urban areas gets neglected. And they are actually taking the load of development of urban areas. And there is also a vice versa situation when the peri-urban areas are getting certain economic benefits or economic livelihoods because of being adjoining to the urban areas. So we need to ensure that there is a balance when this development takes place. And to also ensure that the pressure gets reduced on the peri-urban areas, we should come up with some solutions. So this was more or less a problem statement. And given the time, I think we already looked at all the governance challenges, from unregulated land use conversions to lack of amenities to undevelopment against sporadic developments in the peripheral areas. At GIZ, we were trying to work in the three smart cities of Kochi, Coimbatore, and Bhubaneswar. And we thought that it's important to look at how we can strengthen governance so that when we develop an infrastructure, it doesn't pressurize the peri-urban areas. And for this, we looked at several aspects, from participatory approach to stakeholder consultations, to gender inclusiveness and capacity development, and also looking at institutional strengthening. I would like to, of course, given the limited time, I would like to give you slight examples how we at GIZ try to look at sustainable development, working with the government of state governments and the city government. So for participatory governments, when we were trying to work in Kochi and Coimbatore, we realized that a lot of infrastructure actually lays a thrust on the peri-urban areas. So we along with the government of Kerala and the support from the Kochi Municipal Corporation, floated a design competition called NT Kochi competition. And in this, we tried to ask the citizens what is the way they would like the infrastructure to grow, and where would they like the infrastructure solutions to be housed. So there was a long process wherein we looked at crowdsourcing of various ideas. It was built of technical, community, and institutional participation. We tried to connect the administration, like the private sector, citizens, academia, NGOs, and we tried to focus on possible solutions that are there given the given constraints of development. With this whole process of urban design competition, it was a long process from city planning to looking at how infrastructure solutions and identifying 2 or 3 areas where this approach could be applied. And Malasari Canal was selected with this based on stakeholder consultation. I think those who are familiar with Kochi would know Malasari Canal flows within the city and connects outside, flows outside to the peri-urban areas. There was a design competition done for developing possible sustainable solutions. And we received over 500 entries from a lot of national, international people participating. And from those entries, we selected through an online jury process with the eminent people, 3 or 4 ideas which were presented to the public. And based on the feedback, a common exercise was done. And now the solutions have been developed for DPRs. There was a change of political party, but yet the idea is now pursued by the new governance and also the elected representatives because it was done through a participatory process. So the idea that I'm trying to foster here is that if we want sustainable infrastructure, we have to get into participatory governance. And that is the key to ensure wherever we implement the infrastructure, it is not putting a pressure on any other area. And of course, more details could be accessed from the websites, but the process is at that the DPRs are now into implementation stage and it has been funded by other government aided programs as well. The second case in which we looked at gender as an area for improving governance and infrastructure was in a small city of Sambalpur when we were asked to look at the waste management strategy for that. I would like to focus on the area, the fact that when we are developing infrastructure for an urban area, we have to think of the peri-urban areas. Even if we are developing a waste dump site, we need to ensure that it doesn't hinder the growth of that peri-urban area where the dump site is located. We were working in Sambal for this integrated waste management solution. The idea was to collect the full waste and transport it to a dump site and ensure that it is collected, segregated properly. It wasn't working with all the regulations that was governed by the government. The efforts were done to get in the NGOs, the local people to take the ownership of the solutions. And only through that, now you see the city has at least started collecting coverage. The coverage of waste is really improved. And there has been a lot of processes improvement where ULBs were empowered and also the citizens, Swachh Sathis from to door were looped into the infrastructure solution. So I think this is also one case where women played the most leadership role. So I think it's important when we are looking at sustainable infrastructure and governance, we look at gender as also an important component to be addressed. And one more case that I would like to highlight was like when we are working with the government of Kerala, we realized we need an institution which could give unbiased advice to the state governments and also to the local bodies and to the regulatory parastatals to ensure that the development is not hindering the growth of a particular area. And there we are working with the Institute of Management and Governance to set up an urban resilience center who would then act as a kind of a nodal agency for ensuring that systematic development and environment measures are taken place when the infrastructure is being proposed by the government for implementation. So one more example that I would like to bring to this forum will be on inclusive governance, which we were trying to do in some cities of Tamil Nadu, where we were looking at the compost that is generated out of the organic waste management. So there were a lot of composting units established in the state through the state government initiatives, but there was no marketing strategy that was done so that the end use of the compost is done in the peri-urban areas. There wasn't a very strong link of livelihood that was linked to the initiatives that was done for establishment of these composting units. So it's important that when infrastructure design is done, it is thought from the urban and peri-urban areas, and we are also looking at the linkages that it can provide for boosting the economy. So let's always look at both the sides, or I will say both the sides of the coin when a development takes place. It could also boost the economy because in certain cases in Tamil Nadu, the composting units are actually providing really good manure to the agriculture areas, which was initially not the case. So a sustainable infrastructure would be the one which could close the loop within the area, and it is not really ensuring that the compost is then sell off to an area which is, let's say, 20 kilometers or 100 kilometers away, and we are then spending on the transportation cost. So for this, we came up with certain marketing strategies, and of course, this has been submitted to the government of Tamil Nadu for further improving it. But we tried working in 2 or 3 locations for that. Of course, we also talked about strategic planning process. So how master plan and other processes could be improved. And I think a lot of my colleagues from MMRDA and also others presented. We at GIZ were trying to support one of the district of Ganjam in Orissa to prepare a participatory planning process. And we did support the state government to take the plan for further actions. So these were certain ideas which were actually trying to bring participation at the grassroots level and also ensuring capacity building and institutional strengthening simultaneously. So for sustainable infrastructure, when we are looking at governance, it's important to look at all the pillars and to see what needs to be empowered. Are we building the right capacities? Do we have the right institutions? Can we look at outsourcing activities which are not hindering development, however, making sure that development leads to a circular economy approach so that it becomes a boon than a ban? And also then looking at certain initiatives for participation where citizens own the development. I think that is the bottom line to ensure sustainability, especially in the country like India. And if we ignore the vulnerable and the weaker section, initially maybe the project will take a beginning, but later on it has to be then brought to an halt because of resistance. So it may take longer if we take pre-DPR steps, like plan preparations, visioning, and put in a lot of effort of participation there, because that helps in the long run of implementation of infrastructure. Similarly, for the water supply manual that has been done by the government of India, we are now trying to do a consultation to get feedback on 24/7 water supply systems. So with
You have
these,
1 more minute left, madam.
yes, sir,
You
thank
have
you. And I
one
think,
more. Okay.
yeah, I am on the last slide now. So I think
Okay.
quick takeaways that settlements come first and planning do later will not help us. We have to ensure that governance is thought through while we are implementing the infrastructure solutions from the beginning. And we should need adequate measures to ensure that the peri-urban areas are actually well thought of while we are doing infrastructures for the urban areas. So with these few last words, I would like to then thank the audience for the time. And these are a few points from my side.
Thank you, Monika ji, for very excellent presentation. And friends, I had missed introducing Monika ji in the beginning, so let me do it now. Ms. Monika Bahal works as the Senior Advisor Infrastructure and Basic Services for the Sustainable Urban Development in Smart Cities project at GIZ. She is an architect and urban planner by qualification and has been working in the urban sector for more than 15 years. Some of the core areas for her expertise include infrastructure development, public and municipal finance and governance. She has been working closely with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs and several state governments for various mission programs. She has been guiding several states in implementing various guidelines, strategies, and municipal reforms in the field of basic services and strengthening of urban governance for local bodies in India. So thank you very much, Monika ji, for your very excellent presentation. So friends, now we move on to the next speaker, Dr. Charlene L. Gomes, and title of her presentation is Water-Related Infrastructure Needs in the Future, Community Perspective from Hadia in Peri-Urban Kolkata. And let me give a brief introduction of Dr. Charlene. She is a postdoctoral researcher at Delft University of Technology in Netherlands in the Faculty of Technology, Policy and Management, working on water governance and climate change in urban and urbanizing context. She is currently working in the H2O T2S in urban fringe areas project, focusing on institutions. Her research involves designing and implementing approaches to facilitate stakeholder participation in policy analysis and long-term adaptive planning. She has a PhD from Delft University of Technology and an MSc in Water Science, Policy and Management from the University of Oxford. So now I hand over to Dr. Charlene for making her presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Krishna. Are you able to see my screen now?
Yes, your screen is very much visible. Please proceed.
Okay, perfect. Okay, then I will begin my presentation. So thanks again to Dr. Krishna, and hello everyone. Following the comments by Dr. Chatterjee and Ms. Bal on the need and for community participation, actually I'm quite pleased to be able to present my research in the H2O T2S project on how local perspectives can help future infrastructure and governance needs in peri-urban context, or the planning for future infrastructure and governance needs in peri-urban Kolkata specifically. So I will start by describing the 4 key features of peri-urban areas that I think are quite relevant for my topic today, although a lot of these have been mentioned both yesterday and today, so I won't go into a lot of detail. So first, of course, they are dynamic, evident from the visible changes in land use, economic activities, and populations. Second, their social composition is heterogeneous, and so you have actors with different needs and interests. Third, and very important to this talk, is that they exist in an institutional void, where institutions, in this case, I'm referring to as formal and informal rules. So the formal rules are laws, policies, customs, and the informal rules are customs, social norms, and local practices. Now, the problem is that formal rules are typically arranged along rural and urban boundaries, as many of the other speakers have already said. Although there is a third category called the Nagar Panchayats that is mentioned in the constitution in India, many peri-urban areas are unfortunately still governed by rural institutions. And these rural institutions are ineffective in catering to the changing needs of these areas. So in some cases, both rural and urban institutions are also coexisting, creating a lot of issues about what the roles and responsibilities are in these areas. And fourth, relating to this institutional gap, peri-urban communities are also isolated in terms of their geography from the administrative and decision-making centers. So these features are found to affect the governance of water resources in India, in peri-urban areas of India. So my work focuses largely in the context of peri-urban Pune, Hyderabad, and Kolkata. And here we find a variety of water-related risks. So first, communities lack access to safe, reliable drinking water, but also water access is under threat from cities and industrial areas, in many cases creating tensions between the different users. Sometimes water is also contaminated from industrial pollution as well as urban influence, or it is exploited, leading to seasonal scarcity, salinity, iron, and arsenic contamination, which is especially problematic in the state of West Bengal. And finally, climate hazards are another major threat. So last year, areas in peri-urban Kolkata were affected by Cyclone Amphan, as you must have all read in the news. So there are 3 main challenges that I would like to point out when it comes to infrastructure planning in peri-urban areas. First, the ground level situation is not fully understood due to the disconnect of these areas from the policy level. Second, as a result of this, local knowledge is not fully and properly considered, and communities feel that they have limited agency in steering development of their own localities towards a sustainable development trajectory. On the other hand, sustainable infrastructure planning is needed in order to cope with uncertainty. So here the focus is on flexible infrastructure planning because we don't know how these areas will develop in the future. And peri-urban governance requires coordinated action between a variety of actors at different levels. However, this is often lacking in the peri-urban context that I've studied. So to overcome these challenges, what I'm proposing is that infrastructure planning from a local perspective is useful in designing long-term and flexible plans. So in the next few slides, I want to demonstrate how this can be achieved using the adaptation pathways approach. So in the H2O T2S project, we piloted this approach with communities and local governments in peri-urban Pune, Hyderabad, and Kolkata, but today I'll focus on Kolkata. And this approach was used to help the local actors identify more sustainable, flexible plans for water-related infrastructure. And these actors included people from the community, both men and women involved in household water and local livelihoods, as well as the local government bodies that play a very important role in this area. Now, most of you might have seen this schematic yesterday in the presentation by my colleague Leon, so I will not explain the steps in this approach in a lot of detail. But overall, what we see here in this approach is that you start thinking about the future development from the baseline situation of what is currently happening in these areas. And then you can define a variety of future scenarios that you need to plan for and identify also what your values are and what your goals are when thinking about the future. And then you can formulate a pathway, which is basically a sequence of actions from the current to the future scenarios, and identify tipping points, which are basically the points in time that tell you that the current pathway is no longer feasible and you need to move to another pathway. And finally, you can evaluate this entire pathway schematic in terms of the feasibility and trade-offs. So we applied this pathways approach and we piloted it in the case of Hadia, a peri-urban locality just outside of Kolkata. Hadia is a Mauza situated east of Kolkata city with approximately 8,000 inhabitants. It is roughly 10 kilometers away from nearby New Town, Science City, and the Kolkata Leather Complex. And a large highway runs through Hadia that connects it to Kolkata city. It is also importantly situated in the East Kolkata wetlands, which is a protected Ramsar site since 2002 and is regulated by the East Kolkata Wetland Management Authority. Although wetland development is restricted, illegal land conversion can also be seen in some places. A large wastewater canal runs through Hadia, which carries Kolkata sewerage through the wetland that provides some type of natural treatment. And as a result, aquaculture is the traditional and main livelihood in this locality of Hadia, given the access to nutrient-rich wastewater. Several large fishing ponds or tanks are seen in largely in the northern areas of Hadia and are used for commercial aquaculture by private fishermen or by a large fishing cooperative that exists in Hadia. Secondary livelihoods include small-scale agriculture using groundwater or wastewater, mostly in the southern parts of this area, and water vending businesses, or people are found seek employment in New Town or the Kolkata Leather Complex. This is on the livelihood side. In the household water side, we see that groundwater is a main source of household water that is accessed through public hand pumps and deep tube wells, or is privately funded and shared hand pumps or tube wells. Bottled water or packaged water that is purchased from local RO plants is used for drinking, but those who cannot afford it also use groundwater for drinking. So now, having understand the baseline situation, I will present the future pathways that were developed for Hadia. So this diagram shows the governance and infrastructure needs for livelihoods over the next 15 years. There are three main pathways I want to talk about. The business as usual pathway is the first one. It is the one in red. This is where aquaculture continues as is by private fishermen, with some tourism development in parallel by the fishing cooperatives due to access to government funding. Long term, however, this pathway is not very sustainable due to the rising cost of fishing inputs, declining nutrient levels in wastewater, and the uncertainty of the next generation taking over the aquaculture business. This situation can be expected in the urbanization and unplanned wetland development and climate change scenarios. However, signals of a supported aquaculture sector is an opportunity for people in Hadia to shift to their preferred livelihood pathway, as shown in blue here. This is driven by village development and the protected wetland environment scenarios. The infrastructure-related actions that are needed for this pathway to develop is the improved management of wastewater flow and nutrients, the setup of a wastewater treatment plant, and control of wetland pollution in this order. The preferred pathway is also threatened, however, by urbanization and unplanned wetland development and climate change scenarios. Therefore, the strategy in both of these two pathways is for fishermen to shift to the alternative livelihood pathway, where they leave fishing and move into other kinds of jobs. This is shown in yellow. There are several options here, but the top 3 options depends on how Hadiyal will develop in the future. If the unplanned wetland development scenario happens, then industries will develop and will lead to people getting factory jobs. If there's village development and protected wetland environment, then people can set up small businesses with government aid or work in farming if the sector is further developed by the government. Now, this diagram in comparison shows the household water pathways for Hadia over the next 15 years, similar to the previous one. In the business as usual pathway in red, households continue to rely on hand pumps for domestic water supply and RO water for drinking purposes.
Dr. Sharleen, sorry to interrupt. 1 minute. You have 1 minute now.
Okay. So, however, this alongside the government is also investing in a piped water supply project, but the pipelines are still under construction. If that happens, then they can move to their preferred pathway of using piped water supply for drinking and domestic purposes. And here you can take a look at the slides later to look at the actions needed to support this and the drivers. However, if the piped water supply is not of good quality and people start getting sick, then they would either have to revert to the existing sources or start looking at alternatives. And this depends on how Hadia will develop again. So either they use RO water if more plants emerge and they are well maintained, or they can use shallow tube wells by investing in them as a community and for groundwater use, or they can utilize rainwater if the local government would test rainwater harvesting technologies in the area. So I want to leave by just highlighting the main points from this presentation. The first is that I mentioned earlier the challenges, and I think that this approach can help understand the local context and the longer term infrastructure needs under different scenarios. It provides insight into locally desirable development plans and can be also used to help build consensus between stakeholder groups. And finally, it offers a way to build flexible strategies for water-related infrastructure planning, focusing on key water sectors. So here are some publications if you are interested in learning more about this research. And for now, I thank you for your time and I look forward to the discussions that will follow.
So, thank you, Dr. Sharleen, for the very excellent presentation. And friends, after all the 4 presentations, which were very good in their respective ways, we now have the session for question and answer. And unfortunately, we have now little time for the presentation, about 5 minutes only. But we can take few questions, and this will be facilitated by Ms. Aparna Soni, Assistant Professor of the SPA Bhopal, and also Mr. Partha Sarthi Banerjee, researcher from Kolkata. And it's my privilege to give a brief introduction of both the discussants. Ms. Aparna Soni ji is an architect, urban planner by discipline, presently working as assistant professor in the Department of Planning at the School of Planning and Architecture, Bhopal. Having nearly 10 years of experience in academia, her subject areas include urban governance, land management, and real estate development. She is presently pursuing her doctorate from the Jindal Global University, where she is exploring the widening spectrum of state-society relationship in various land assembly models across the states in India. And the other colleague on the panel will be Mr. Parsarthi Banerjee, who is running a research consultancy service named The Researcher, based in Kolkata, working with different research organizations and institutions of national and international repute, with focus on water-related research and a keen interest in studying the dynamics behind its endangered sustainability in the context of changing socio-economic political structures of the human society. And I now hand over to Ms. Soni and Mr. Parsarthi. But kindly take note that time limit is only 5 minutes.
Sure, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you all the speakers and the chair for such a wonderful, exciting session that we've had. We've almost covered all facets that should find a mention when we're talking about peri-urban areas in our country. There is a question by the moderator of the session, Professor Leon. His question to all the speakers is, who is or should be coordinating peri-urban development? We've noticed a lot of fragmentation being talked about, and alongside all the participatory initiatives that we've seen. So the question is that who should at all be coordinating the peri-urban development? And I would personally like to add something to this question, which is that when we look at the word peri-urban, there's urban in it, but we all know that the peri-urban has two frontiers. It's the urban frontier and as well as the rural. So the question is that which side do you emphasize more on while we are trying to make some policy decisions, especially in relation to how India grows in the future? Over to all the speakers. Where would you want to take it first? The question from Leon: who is or should be coordinating peri-urban development?
I think this can be addressed by Professor Tathagat. May like to address.
Okay. Yes, I think in an ideal perspective, there has to be one overarching municipal planning, metropolitan level planning authority that has been thought about in 74th Metropolitan Planning Committee, which would have representation from different ULBs into that body as something like, in Calcutta Metropolitan Development Authority or Mumbai Metropolitan Development Authority. But the fact of the matter is, what we have seen so far is that in theory that is very good, but in practice, how the relationship between the different institutions which are involved there, there is a lot of scope for improvement and discussion. Because so far what I have seen that
Sir, kindly conclude because we have more questions. Please
okay.
Answer.
So what I have seen that the main thrust of the Metropolitan Planning Committee, or rather the Development Authority, they are still working in the Development Authority mode. Is on trunk infrastructure, and very little goes into active citizen engagement at the local level.
Thank you, Professor Sagar. Thank you. So friends, I would suggest that those who want to raise questions may kindly type out the question in the chat box. And I see a question by Mr. Saravanan, and who has asked that what are the current dialogue, and this question, I think Mr. Mayur Kulkarni may be able to handle it well enough. So please take note, Mr. Kulkarni. The question is that what are the, you can see in the chat box also, what are the current dialogue or cooperation processes between the city authorities like MMRDA and peri-urban authorities, other than collecting information from peri-urban authorities? Mr. Mayur.
Basically, we are not only collecting the data, but we are also preparing plans for the city area. By there are through two ways. There is one regional plan for the metropolitan area is there, and apart from that, we are also having development plans for specific areas which are like future growth areas, like Bhiwandi notified area or Kalyan notified area. So apart from sharing the data, we are also preparing them and getting them under the development plan, so that there will be physical infrastructure provisions and social infrastructure provisions.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question I noticed has been posted by Professor Leon himself, and the question is to all the speakers, and I suppose Monica ji can handle it, respond to it. And the question is that who is or should be coordinating peri-urban development, and who could be leading the process? The current picture seems to be somewhat fragmented.
Dr. Sudhir, apologies. I think Aparna Soni has already flagged my question for the attention of Professor
Okay.
Chatterjee.
Yeah,
but maybe being aware of the time, Partha and Aparna can help us to get the
Yeah, sure.
essential questions and finish in
Because
few
I did not
minutes.
see any
Yeah.
question more. Right, sir. Right. Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's okay.
May I?
Thank you.
Yeah. May I add one point? Is coming from all the presentations. Can you hear? Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yes.
the problem which we are founding in the peri-urban areas, that is the future of the water bodies, that is raised by Dr. Chatterjee, and we are founding in the peri-urban Kolkata city area, because particularly small water bodies are, it did not become very clear from the other two presentations, what is happening in those areas, in Kochi, Coimbatore, or in Mumbai peri-urban areas, what is happening to these water bodies. But preserving these water bodies is becoming a very challenging thing, and how could it be for the future, because in the city areas, water bodies are vanishing rapidly, and the same impact is going on in peri-urban areas. So that is the most challenging point, and I'm wondering whether these small water bodies should be taken over by the government authorities or something like that, and be preserved with the participation of the local communities. That thing should be a question to think over. And finally, the participation of the participatory management of the resources. There is a very, very important process that we have seen in the local, that women are coming forward, but there is little space for them in the decision-making bodies. Even when there are representation in different municipalities and corporations and panchayats, women are representing, but their voices are largely unheard of. That should be our concern, that their voices are heard of, and their capabilities and their livelihood opportunities should be taken care of by the government and by the different authorities. That should come in our policy making, decisions and policy making suggestions. That's all.
Very good, sir. Thanks.
I think
now-
there is one question by Professor Binayak Chaudhary from SPA Bhopal to Dr. Shirley. He wants to understand what her presentation containing institutional voids necessarily meant, because in his view, it's institutional incapacity rather than a void, which plays its role in the governance deficits that we just saw in her presentation. Dr. Shirley, would you want to respond, please?
Yeah, I was actually just typing up a reply to him in the chat. But yes, Binayak, I agree with your point about it being ineffective. That was also the point that I made in that slide. But what I meant here in terms of institutional void is there's really no consistency in the way of how peri-urban areas in the way that peri-urban areas are governed. Some are coming under municipal councils already, or municipal authority jurisdiction. Some are still under the rural areas. So it really seems that in all of the cases, the types of institutional arrangements don't seem to be effective. And what the question that Leon mentioned is that, what type of coordinating body is needed here? Well, my answer is that I don't necessarily see a solution right off the bat, because I mean, you see the first presentation where they talked about Gurgaon being part of Delhi, and that was really beneficial. And it protected the identity, whereas the main problem, I think, that these areas share is that they lack the resources to develop the areas on their own. And I think addressing that challenge will really be essential to also helping them develop these areas on their own with more agency based on their own identity also, and maybe in a more sustainable way, not necessarily all becoming part of the cities. So yeah, I meant institutional void just in terms of the complexity and the variety of institutional arrangements that we see here. But I agree that they all sort of show that they are a little bit ineffective.
Thank you, Dr. Sherlin. I think we are done with the questions asked by the participants. They are mostly answered. So I hand it over to the chair now. Thank you.
Thank you both, Aparnaji as Parthaji, both. Thank you very much. And now we come to the close of the program. I wonder whether, because I joined a little late, whether Professor Leon was introduced or not. If Professor Leon was not introduced, then let me introduce him. Professor Leon Hermes is an associate professor in water policy analysis at the Delft University of Technology at IHE Delft in the Netherlands. At the IHE Delft, Leon is currently also the head of the Land and Water Management Department. His research interests are monitoring, evaluation, and learning to support adaptive delta management and water-related transformation to sustainability. The emphasis in his work is always on the multi-actor complexities involved in strategic planning. Leon has co-authored textbooks on policy analysis of multi-actor systems in 2010 and actor and strategy models published by John Wiley and Sons in 2018. So friends, with that introduction of our core moderator, I now come to the last part of the program, and that last part is about summing up the takeaways. So friends, the takeaways already the discussants have also mentioned. I will just say a few words only, because we are already through with our time and I'm snatching away 5 minutes from the next session. That all these speakers have highlighted the significance of giving importance to local level governance also in terms of planning as well as for implementing the development programs, not only national but state as well as local. They have also highlighted the significance of the adverse impact, the caution about adverse impact of development of on the peri-urban areas that is going on in terms of the natural resources like water bodies, drainage systems on one hand, and pumping in or pouring in the construction and demolition waste or other waste materials from the cities to the peri-urban areas. At the same time, they have also highlighted that participatory and inclusive planning approaches can really show us the way in resolving the challenges. It is high time to recognize that peri-urban areas are very important source or very important participants in the development process, whereas they are getting neglected. And if properly given proper attention, as we have seen some of the examples through the presentations, given due care and attention, they can really bring about a harmonious and balanced growth of the region. As MMRDA is trying or other areas are trying, a harmonious balanced development of the region can be achieved by adaptive planning and inclusive planning in the regional mode by giving focus and attention to the peri-urban areas. I think a lot of discussion needs to be continued on these lines at various levels, and I'm sure today's program will kindle a series of other activities, other similar programs in the coming times. So with that, I thank all the participants. On one hand, they have patiently participated throughout this 1.5 hour session, and presenters made excellent presentation and discussants did wonderful job. And special thanks to Dr. Sridharan and his team, as well as to Professor Leon for moderating the program so well. And the session will be ending here, and I hand over to Professor Leon for concluding it as it has to be taken forward for the next step. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sudhir Krishna, for nicely summing up the main points from the session and for chairing the session so well. Thank you also on my behalf to all the speakers and discussants and all the participants who also participated in the chat with their comments and questions. I've really enjoyed it, and I would like to share with everyone that we will continue this conference with a closing plenary session that is also in this very same Zoom meeting, but in the plenary room. So to go there, you can leave the room using the bottom button at the lower right part of your Zoom screen. Choose leave room, and then you should enter into the plenary room. And there we will continue after a short break. We will continue in 23 minutes from now. So I'm looking forward to seeing you all there. And thank you once again, everyone, for a really nice session.
Bye.
Thank
Thank you
you.
all.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.